Is for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Is for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.
Good morning, everybody. I am unsure of how to start this one, but as I'm thinking through it, some kind of title or at least the theme suggests itself to me. And that is the interesting and sometimes startling ways in which almost purely spiritual ideas, realities, or concepts intersect with what gets presented as true over and over in therapy in very scientific, biological, physiological ways. And so I was sitting here thinking, well, how am I going to talk about this? And I'm not sure. So in general, I'll just do what I usually do, which is sort of to wing it and riff on it and see if it comes together. Let's start with some psychological truths. I am a trauma therapist. All therapists deal with trauma, but someone who calls themselves a trauma therapist almost always means that we spend a lot of time thinking about and studying developmental trauma, which is when all of the most serious and impactful trauma occurs, trauma that is difficult for people to get over. And then you're dealing with stuff like PTSD, depression, anxiety, these things that have come out of childhood experiences that become very stubborn and often difficult to deal with later in life. So let's talk about what a flashback is, or what a complex trauma flashback is. I think most people know that if you take a veteran who's been in a theater of war for 3 or 4 years, or for whatever, has been shot at multiple times, has shot people, et cetera, and when I was a kid, cars backfired. That doesn't exist anymore, but if you remember what it is, it's like a car going pop, the engine backfiring. And so imagine an engine backfires, everybody else is like, oh, a car backfiring, but the veteran leaps behind the couch and ducks for cover. Everyone understands what that is. That veteran has had so many intense life or death situations at the sound of a gunshot that his or her brain now interprets that large, sharp sound as a threat to life and is immediately responding in a way that's adaptive for the theater of war, but becomes maladaptive once he or she is out of that situation. And then we start calling it a flashback. It's like, well, we know that this person is not being shot at now. Of course, that's maybe not so much true in the US anymore. We have so many shootings, but in general, people are walking around and it's like, you're not being shot at now. So essentially what your brain is doing is generating a reality, is flashing back to a reality that was true, that's no longer true, but is making it true now. And not just like, oh, I remember that it's true, but my body, my emotions, my psychological state is literally responding as if it is true right now in the moment. That's a flashback. And at the most intense levels, the person may no longer be capable of discerning the difference. So when you get into really serious flashbacks, you have a mild to medium level of psychosis. And people don't talk about this because usually when we talk about psychosis, people think of schizophrenia or drug-induced psychosis, where people have completely lost their connection to reality. And what people don't talk about is that intense chronic levels of PTSD, people lose their ability to stay in touch with reality, and they respond often with violence or with paranoia that has no connection to reality. And if it's complex trauma flashback and they've been this way their entire lives, people are just like, oh, they're messed up, they had a bad childhood. But we're only beginning to acknowledge in the last 10 years that this indicates that this person is in a flashback. And in fact, they live in a flashback. And we don't recognize it as a flashback. Again, the veteran who leaps behind the couch when a car backfires, we're like, oh, that person's having a flashback. But we don't recognize people with so-called personality disorders where they're permanently angry or permanently defensive or permanently dishonest. They're just constantly in this adaptive, maladaptive emotional response to reality that has no connection to reality, where the rest of us are like, why are you behaving this way? Nothing's going on. Why are you acting so anxious? Why are you being so angry? What we're not acknowledging is that person lives in a permanent flashback, right? Their brain has internalized a certain state of danger and now generates that as a reality internally, even when there's nothing outside of them that actually validates that as a reality. That's a flashback. That's a complex trauma flashback, right? So this is anybody who's a EMDR practitioner, trauma resiliency model, anybody who's really skilled at treating trauma, at dealing with developmental trauma, who understands the physiology, who's done a deep dive into the science and physiology, and has listened to people like Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk, listening to the leading researchers and thinkers and experts in this field, knows that people have developed hypermuscular chronic perseverant coping mechanisms that we come to view as a personality, but in fact it's a flashback. They're living as if the reality that they grew up in or the thing that happened to them is now permanently true, and they're generating that inside, right? And so then a therapist's job is to, you can't argue with it, because if someone is deeply convicted and convinced and they're having this inner experience, you can't just be like, whoa, what's happening to you isn't real, right? They're going to feel defended and attacked. Often people with that level of chronic complex flashback have been gaslit by their abusers. And so if their therapist is stepping in and going, well, what you're experiencing is not true, they're going to place you as the abuser. And now you have no chance of reaching them unless you do some serious repair and then never do that again, right? So first, you have to just sort of go with, yes, what you're experiencing is true and real and valid. And once you develop trust with them and they start playing with, like, why am I like this? What's going on? Like, am I crazy? No, you're not crazy. This might be related to a coping mechanism. It's normal. It is in fact normal. Right? Any human animal, the biology will adapt to really intense life-threatening situations. And if those intense life-threatening situations continue long enough and chronically enough, the nervous system will just decide there's no value in reverting to a calm state. There's no point in it. I might as well just stay in a state of hyper readiness and hyperactivation, because it just makes me safer and it makes me ready for this thing when it comes, unprepared and unexpected. So that's someone who had really chaotic, unpredictable parents, or someone raised in a war zone where they never know when a bomb's going to go off or when they're going to be raided, or whatever. So this is normal. This is normal biology. This is what the biology does. So as a therapist, as you watch this, there's one thing that may be uncomfortable, that you want to wait until people are ready to hear it. They've done enough healing and they trust themselves enough and they trust their relationship with a therapist enough. When they really want to know the anatomy, the physiology of this, like, what is this? Why is this happening? There's something that's factually true, that's really sad, that's really difficult, especially if you're the person in it. And that is, saying it's a flashback isn't entirely accurate. Someone with PTSD often will have visual memories, so their brain will generate images of what happened to them. But for many people who have trauma that's pre-verbal, meaning it was happening to them when they were 1.5, 2. So they don't even have a conscious memory of it. It just went into their body, it went into their unconscious, and they just have this body response to a smell or a situation, or they're just that way all the time. Again, what people call personality disorders are people who have just become that way all the time. And they consider it their personality. They don't know how else to be. They can't even imagine anything else. So there may be images, or there may be bodily responses or emotional responses. Sometimes there are cognitive responses, but the earlier it is, it's not even cognitive. They're just a way of being that gets generated. Here's the difficult and painful truth, especially for the person who has been victimized by what happened to them. And then also they become victimized by their own nervous system response. It's not exactly a flashback. My own nervous system and my own biology is literally generating it in the moment. And it's generating it not based on what my environment is. It's generating it because my biology, my animal instincts have decided I have a better chance of surviving if I'm in this hyperactivated fight or flight state. And this is where people with chronic PTSD will get to the point that their nervous system doesn't even trust relaxation piece. So if they do relax, if they have a moment where they accidentally back into relaxation, they're kind of like laughing with a trusted friend and they're having a good time, and suddenly they'll consciously realize, oh my God, like my body's relaxed, like this is amazing, it feels so good. Their nervous system will freak out because their nervous system will go, yeah, but that's not safe. Feeling good is not safe, because when you were a child, as soon as you felt good, that parent who was chaotic and unpredictable, or who even hated it when other people felt safe, would attack. And so the nervous system will instantly generate images from childhood, or generate feelings from childhood, or will generate a threat from inside. It will generate a thought that's a threat. It'll generate a body state that feels threatened, or it'll generate images that were threatening when we experienced them decades ago or whenever. And then the nervous system, as an animal organism, is forced to respond with fight or flight. And so suddenly here I am in fight or flight again. Well, that's really sad, but that's actually what happens. So the truth is, the uncomfortable truth for people with chronic PTSD, because we tend to want to believe that this state is still justified. There's still things happening. The world is still shitty. It's still a shitty place with lots of threats. And, you know, when I went to the post office, you know, the clerk was really pissy and aggressive, and it felt aggressive to me. And that's why I feel this way. They might have been in an aggressive mood. They might have been impolite. They might even have spoken abruptly and said, excuse me, could you please stand in a line over here? The line is here. You can't see that. Sometimes people behave really badly and unkindly, and that's just shitty and abrasive. Yeah, the person might have experienced that. That's not a threat. That's not an existential threat to an adult. That's just someone having a bad day, or someone who's learned to be a shitty person. It's not an existential threat. But the person with chronic PTSD will feel this massive defense response. And rather than going, wow, I think maybe there's something going on with my nervous system. Some people do. Some people retain that sense of like, oh, there's something wrong with me. Why do I have this response? I know this person is unpleasant, but why do I get into this response where my heart is like slamming in my chest and I feel violent towards the person, and I can't sleep for a week after that? I just imagine beating the crap out of them, or I feel scared and I want to run, or it makes me want to cry. Like, why am I having this? But a lot of people will just be like, yeah, you know, the world is shitty, and that was a shitty person, and that's why I feel this way. That's not why you feel that way. Our nervous system in the moment will generate the fight or flight response, and will use what seem to be justified experiences to go, well, that's why I feel this way. But the truth is, I am generating that. I'm generating it. My nervous system is using its bandwidth, its energy, its resources, its imagination to generate thoughts, ideas, images, or sometimes just a body state, which is the hardest because it's unconscious. To generate a body state that justifies this ramp up of the heart rate and maybe violent thoughts or feelings, or scared, intensely scared thoughts or feelings of victimization or defensiveness or anger or bitterness at how horrible the world is and why there are horrible people who ruin everything for everyone, right? But you can see how that spins out of control and becomes quickly irrational. That's not true. That person is not ruining everything for everyone. They're not even ruining it for me. I have to own the fact that my nervous system generated in the moment, generated an internal state. And this is not to victim blame, right? I knew someone once who had grown up during multiple civil wars. And so obviously there are bombs, gunshots, violence, really horrible things happening in community, right? This is not something that happened on the battlefield. This is something that infiltrated, et cetera, et cetera. And 4th of July is a fun holiday. And so everyone from all the friend group from my college, we would get together and we would go to the local fireworks that were put on actually at the football field at our local college. And this person would make him or herself go, but then would sit there shaking as these fireworks explode because this person's body was having flashbacks to what he or she had heard or experienced. I don't blame that person. I'm not trying to victim blame and be like, oh, well, it's your fault. Your body's doing it. It's not your fault, right? Our bodies, our animal biology, our emotional brain, our mammalian brain is no more complex or advanced than a cow's brain or a dog's brain, any other animal. The hindbrain is reptilian. It's not any more advanced than an alligator. It will fight as psychopathically. Your hindbrain will fight as psychopathically, as sociopathically to live, and it will kill anything that gets in the way to keep living and breathing and to eat, as any crocodile or alligator. Your midbrain, your emotional brain, is just as irrational and emotional as a cow. The difference with humans is the cerebral cortex, the neocortex, the new part of the brain, the outer layer, which is much more rational, has the ability to look at things clearly, to compare things to different experiences, to see things with much more perspective. And that's the part of the brain that parents the rest of the brain. So I'm not blaming that person that their midbrain and their hindbrain is what all of ours is, and it has been tuned up by these horrible experiences. What I'm saying is factually, anatomically, our brain and our body is generating in the moment. It's not that we're regressing or going back to some past state. It is that we're actively using our bandwidth to generate the state in the moment because the brain has decided it's safer to do this, and this will protect me. As long as I'm shivering and terrified in response to these sounds, I have a better chance of surviving than the person who's relaxed, which was true in that environment. It's adaptive in that environment. It just becomes maladaptive when we're no longer in the environment and the brain doesn't know how to let go of it. So I'm not blaming that person. I spent probably 40 plus years in that state. And when EMDR and trauma resiliency model and a really talented therapist help shift that in my body, it was a revolution. It literally blew my mind. I was like, I can't fucking believe it. I cannot believe that I lived in what I lived in. And I finally understand how people can work 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And I could only work 3, 4 hours a day and I would feel absolutely suicidal. I would be so overwhelmed. And I would think, I'm never going to make it through life. I can't even work a job. This is so destructive. So I want you to understand when I'm describing this, I'm not judging you or accusing you or blaming the victim. I was in that position for a long, long, long time, and it is utterly destructive. And you feel completely desperate and hopeless, and you fight with everything you have day after day after day, and no one knows how to help you. People don't know. There's lots of therapists who don't know how to deal with it if your developmental trauma was bad enough. So I understand. But what I'm saying is, and then I will connect this to the spiritual reality. And I'm not a spiritual leader, so I'm just going to tell you what other people say, what seems to me to be true, that matches with psychology. The anatomy of the thing is, for whatever reason, not blaming the victim, it's not a flashback. You're not regressing. You're not going back to something in the past. Your brain literally uses all of its energy and its bandwidth and in your internal resources to generate that state. It will literally generate what you experienced before. It's trying to inoculate you. It's trying to go, you need to be big enough and strong enough to meet this and for this not to be life-threatening to you. And if you relax and you become relaxed, you're going to become weak and soft and not ready. And so every time you relax, I'm going to generate this state. I'm going to actively generate this state to put you back in fight or flight so that you are ready. So you are a hardened warrior. You are an emotional, psychological warrior ready at any moment for whatever danger, for whatever attack, for whatever anything is threatening to you. That's the reasoning of the hindbrain and the midbrain and the amygdala, the fight or flight system. It's not accurate. It slowly wears people down and makes them weaker and weaker. Being in active fight or flight, day in and day out, month in and month out, year in and year out, decade in and out, has terrible outcomes. It wears you down. It weakens you. It makes you more neurotic. It makes you more paranoid. It makes you less able to reality test appropriately. It burns through all your energy so that you can't spend it on what is difficult. Life is difficult and it takes a lot of work and energy and focus, and you're unable to do that. But it believes it's helping you. It believes it's helping you survive. It's not, but it believes it is, right? So it is literally generating it in the moment. It's using all your resources and it's generating it in the moment. So here's the connection to the spiritual world. I watch this happen in the room, right? As I work with people with complex PTSD, with chronic PTSD, who have spent years, sometimes decades in it, or people who are not. They just have a one-off, they had a good childhood, and then they have a violent car accident and they develop PTSD. As I talk through stuff, and that involves sometimes triggering things, I watch their brain and their body generate it. And suddenly they generate it, and now they're in that state. I was talking to a shaman in a place like Southern California. There's a lot of spirituality, and a lot of it's full of crap. A lot of it is spiritual bypassing. It's people not dealing with reality or life or their own shortcomings by acting pseudo-spiritual. But there are some people I have deep respect for their practice, and there are some people with spiritual wisdom who I listen to, and this man is one of them, a shaman who I have been blessed to be able to sit with him here and again. And I was talking through, when we sit, I talk through things. I don't know anything. I don't have any spiritual wisdom, but things seem to be true, and I just run through those things and say, this is what seems to be true in this world of objects and things and limits and this finite world, blah blah blah. And he'll say, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean? And I'll describe things and, tell him my spiritual yearnings and my psychological yearnings. And one of my spiritual yearnings is, right, this idea that there's a veil between us and the greater reality. That when we enter this life, a veil drops so that we can have our individual experience and feel limited and feel separated from others so that we can experience self and others, right? Individuality is part of what this reality is. And that possibly in the end, it's all oneness. We are all connected through consciousness, conscious awareness, et cetera, et cetera. This is part of Buddhism. This is part of Hinduism. This is part of, like, there are many, many spiritual, I'm not saying anything that I invented. I have found it to be true, to present itself as true. But again, I'm not a spiritual leader. I don't know. But there are these ideas and they present themselves as true to me in my experience. And so I said to the shaman at one point, I said, I very badly want to see beyond the veil. I'm not super enamored of this life and the amount of suffering that's in it and the amount of suffering that I did. I'm not super enamored of life-consuming life. And it's like, even if you're vegan, now there's good evidence that plants are sentient, that they can perceive pain, that they do things to defend themselves. If you're not aware of this, for example, when you notice giraffes, right, eating from whatever the type of trees that they eat way up there and they'll sort of nibble, and then you'll see them wander off and they'll bypass a couple groups of trees and then they'll wander further away and then they'll eat again quite a ways away. And I used to always wonder why. Like, why did you walk all the way over there to eat from that tree? And now reading a book, I think it's called The Hidden Life of Trees. I don't know if I had that right. It's an amazing book. You should pick it up. But it's a biologist or someone, who has spent his whole entire career studying trees, their life cycles, et cetera, et cetera. Trees, like all plants, will defend themselves. So those trees, once they perceive themselves being eaten, will generate a chemical that puts this odor out that communicates to its neighboring family trees, which it's often connected to through mycelium, right? Fungi networks that carry signals and sugar from tree to tree, food from tree to tree. Even if it's not, it communicates with this chemical odor. And then the neighboring trees, when they pick up on that odor, that threat, will actually put out a bitter chemical so that their leaves are not tasty and also might give someone a stomachache. So then the giraffes adapt by going, this is turned bitter, I'm going to wander, but I'm not going to stop at the neighboring trees. I'm going to go far enough that it's a tree that hasn't received the warning signal. I'm going to eat those leaves. So life, responding to life. So even with vegans, right, you're consuming plants and those plants want to live and they defend themselves. They do things to defend themselves. And there's even studies now where it's like, if you hook up something that can translate the plant's electrical signals into sound, when you cut a plant, it appears to make distressed sounds. Okay, so I'm not super enamored of whatever this is. It's life-consuming life. It doesn't seem to be any escape from, look, for me to have a good life requires suffering and death for so many other living things. It just seems inescapable. So I'm not super enamored of whatever this is. So one of the things that I was talking to him is, I want to see beyond the veil. I want to know in a larger, grander scale what in the hell this is, why this is. Like what's my like what's going on? I don't even care about my function. What the fuck is going on here? And he said, there is no veil. And at first I was disappointed because it's almost like it's this passive sort of victim state of like where there's this veil, this thing was done to me and now I can't see, and I'm genuinely seeking and asking for some other thing to like raise this veil and let me see, and if it doesn't raise the veil, then it's choosing not to let me see. God's obscure, like whatever it is, it's still passive, right? And as I thought about and thought about and thought about and thought about, there is no veil. It's an illusion. There is no veil. I realized that I watch this in myself and I watch this in clients every day. I generate the veil. We generate the veil. It takes active energy to generate the veil. We have to actively, in the moment, as conscious, autonomous, free-willing beings who God may have granted free will and said, even if you're going to hurt yourself, I give you free will. And once given, it's yours. It is now yours. You have the freedom to create your reality. I generate the veil. I generate the veil. PTSD is a really intense experience of this. Now, we're all generating the veil. We're all delusional, right? Let's say someone, well, first, let's take the PTSD example. I'm not, again, I spent 40 plus years in it. I'm not blaming, but it's anatomically just what the thing is. It's a delusion generated by my own brain and nervous system and body. End of story. Unless you're trapped in a country where you cannot escape and there are people actively, weekly, daily, continuing to threaten your life and torment you and torture you, then yes, whatever your body's doing is accurate and reasonable. Most of us were generating a delusion of fear, right? So you can see that with PTSD. Let's take a more subtle example. Let's take someone who had a pretty adaptive childhood with parents who pushed in the right ways and provided appropriate age-appropriate challenges such that this person develops resiliency and belief in themselves and is fairly reasonable, but also feels really, really loved and gets lots of hugs and acknowledgement and validation, and they seem to be well-adjusted, et cetera, et cetera. And out of this, they're able to be reasonable with people and kind and to relate well and to take on challenges, and they build a beautiful career doing something that they love doing, and they get married, they have kids, they love their kids, they love their wife or husband, whatever it is. They seem to be having a pretty nice life with the challenges. Maybe they have a close friend that dies and they go through grief. Like their life is life, but they're doing pretty well. They're having a pretty good life, right? And then for some reason, whatever, for some global reason, their entire industry collapses. And I mean collapses. Their entire skill set, the one thing that they truly developed, collapses. And they're stunned and depressed and confused, and they didn't develop others. Like, this is what they have done. Like, what are they supposed to do? And then suddenly within 2 weeks, their spouse goes to the doctor and is diagnosed with terminal cancer. And they have 3 kids, and they just lost their job, and their industry that they were skilled in, that they loved, collapsed. and they're going to lose their spouse. And they sink into the depths of despair, but not just despair, a feeling of massive injustice. I've been a good person my entire life. I've worked hard my entire life. I've been kind to people. I've done everything I could. I've contributed to others. I've donated money. I have helped others when they were in need. When my son had a friend who had a really, really rough home life, we allowed him to come live with us for 2 or 3 years and became his parents and fed him, and like whatever it is, like how is this fair? This is so unfair. Okay, be careful with what I'm saying now. I'm not saying it's this person's fault, but what I'm saying is that's a delusion. The idea that it's unfair is a delusion. Something very painful, and this is a trigger warning, but something when I started thinking through this is years ago, I was watching a nature program, and they were documenting, I think, rhinos. And they'll often, I think, go into rivers because it makes it easier to float. They're these huge animals. And occasionally the males will get in fights and have these massive gargantuan battles, whatever. In one of these battles, a baby, like a 1.5-year-old or whatever, was accidentally gored in its stomach. 1.5, and it managed to drag itself up on the bank. Now, you know what's going to happen. This is nature. First of all, a gut wound is one of the worst ways to die. Right? You get an infection, you suffer terribly, horribly, you can't eat, and you die slowly in excruciating pain. So that happened to a baby, a 1.5-year-old. And that's all it got. It was born, it lived 1.5 years and died in excruciating pain over a period of, I don't know, 3 days, a week, I don't know. In the immortal words of the character in the movie The Unforgiven, when Clint Eastwood's character stands over the sheriff with a shotgun to his face ready to execute him, and the sheriff says, "I don't deserve this, to die like this." And Clint Eastwood's character says, "Deserve's got nothing to do with it." Okay, that was said with all of this, yeah, because the sheriff was kind of a bad guy who beat his friend to death. So you're like, yeah, take that. But no, take the emotion and sentiment out of it. It's just a fact. Deserve has got nothing to do with any of it. We don't deserve or not deserve anything. We're just here, and shit happens. And sometimes it's horrible shit. Sometimes it's horrible. Fair or unfair has got nothing to do with whatever's going on here. When you are kind to others, you can't do it as a unwritten contract with the universe and go, well, I've done this all my life, therefore you can't hurt me. The universe is not trying to hurt you. Just shit happens, and some of that shit isn't for you. And sometimes some of that shit accidentally completely destroys you. But it's not personal. It has nothing to do with you. I'm not saying this with glee. It's just a fact. So what's the point? The point is that person who lived a good life and was taught to be ethical and kind and worked really hard to be kind and had a pretty beautiful life because of that, had pretty good outcomes, and then just randomly, the way things fell out, industry destroyed, has no other skill set, spouse diagnosed with terminal cancer, boom, maybe it's going to break that person financially, it's going to break them emotionally, and they still have to, they can't even commit suicide. They got to stay alive for 3 kids and figure it out. Maybe they end up homeless. That happens. Am I saying it doesn't matter? No. Am I saying this? Am I trying to be like, oh, whatever, who cares? What do you come? No. That's a shitty attitude. That's a shitty, unkind attitude. I don't feel unkind. What I'm saying is, objectively, factually, if that person starts sinking into this mental state of it's not fair, they're generating a delusion in a moment when they need all their faculties, and they need every ounce of energy they have. They need everything they have as a human animal to respond to this terrible situation, this sad situation, this situation for grief and struggle, in which they need to be strong for their kids. In this moment where they need every tiny ounce of bandwidth they have, it is a terrible waste to allow any of your bandwidth to be engaged in thoughts like it's unfair, because that is a delusion. There's nothing about this reality that has to do with fair or not fair. Those are just concepts that humans generate to try to make society operate a little bit better. But life itself, the state of life itself, never acted like anything was fair. None of this has to do with fair. You think it was fair for the rhino, for the 1.5-year-old rhino? There are worse cases that I don't, because of the triggers, I don't even want to talk about. The case of a 4-year-old in South Africa who was left alone by a mother who went to prostitute herself for money and was violently sexually assaulted for close to 2 hours, to the point that she had to have multiple surgeries to reconstruct her internal organs. Like, what the fuck are we talking about fair? It's all any of that happens is horrible. It's not about fair or not fair. It is just a fact that we generate delusions that make it difficult for us to have a relationship to the fact that we're alive and that we are conscious and we are alive. I feel bad that I even brought up those examples. I'm a human. Those are horrible things that I don't want to think about. But I bring them up not to do trauma comparisons like, oh, whatever you have, well, somebody has it. No, that's not the point. It's not whatever you have, someone has it worse, so you shouldn't feel bad. It is to know factually that whatever's happening here, none of it has anything to do with deserve or not deserve, fair or unfair. Those are concepts that we have invented, and they're good concepts, by which we try to make society operate a little bit better and try to help socialize people to be more decent to one another, so that society can run better, so that we're not constantly at war or stealing from one another or preying on one another, for things to be a little bit better. That's the point of those things. But we get confused when we think that those are actual objective things that adhere in the state of consciousness and in the state of life. They don't. Do you really think that life itself built those when it is natural and normal for that to happen to a rhino, or for that to happen to that? And when I say natural and normal, I don't mean that we're okay with it, but it's natural because it happens over and over and over and over all the time. I worked at a veterinarian clinic, and I used to, as a tech, and I used to do skin scrapings on dogs, because they would come in with mange or whatever. They would have some, and it's often a parasite. And so you do a scraping of the skin, and you put in a little oil on a slide, and you put it in the microscope, and you look. And I learned to recognize, various parasites. And you look, and you're like, oh, there's this parasite. And so then you can go tell the doctor it was whatever. I don't remember the name of the parasite. And then they have the particular um, bath shampoo that can then eradicate that parasite. And so I remember, and the doctor was like, go back and look at it, try to memorize. I think they were trying to groom me to become a veterinarian, which I appreciate, or maybe at least a tech. I don't know, a better tech. There's a really bright light on the microscope. And I remember going and looking. And these, from my perspective, were like so ugly, weird alien things with like little claw-like appendages and weird little insect body. And it was like, ugh. Really? We probably look gross to them. And I remember going back and looking. I think I was like 19 or no, I had to be 20 or 21. Looking, and the light was getting hotter and hotter, and you begin to watch that parasite begin to behave frantically. It was moving differently. It wasn't just languidly kind of like, oh, I'm in this liquid here. What's going on? Let me go over here and eat this skin flake. It became frantic. And you realize, oh, it's being burnt alive by the heat of the light. And I felt disturbed, and I thought, something's wrong with this whole thing. I'm sitting here going, yeah, fuck you, parasite. You made this dog uncomfortable. But the parasite's just a life. Nobody handed me a rule book and said, hey, by the way, dog important, parasite not. We call it a parasite, but we're all parasites. We're all living off of life. We're all consuming life. Humans are parasitic on the earth. We literally raise thousands of animals who have miserable lives. We take their kids away from them so that we can constantly get the milk from them. And once they're depressed and exhausted and are no longer of use and they won't put out milk anymore, we slaughter them. You think we're not parasites? We're all doing the same thing. It's all life-consuming life. There's no rule that says that that parasite should suffer, be burnt alive, cooked in that oil in the microscope, and I shouldn't. There is no fair and unfair. Life itself, this life, seems to have built in that you will be born, there will be a certain amount of suffering, maybe a significant amount of suffering, and then you will end. And there's no prescription for how long. Humans are like, well, 80 years, you put it, maybe we're supposed to live 150. Maybe we're doing shit to screw that up. And 100 years will be like, oh my God, those poor people. Like we look back when the life expectancy was 35, all of those poor people live brutal lives. Like they're born, they're having kids by the time they're 15. They were child laborers. They were put to work by the time they were 7, and they had kids at 15 and lived this horrible, difficult life. Half of their kids died in infancy, and then they died at 35. Oh my God, it's terrible. Well, maybe people will look back at us and go, oh my God, it was terrible. And there is significant joy and pleasure. I realize this is getting a little dark, right? But I'm not saying this to be depressed about it. What I'm saying is, fair and unfair has nothing to do with it. So that person who protests, this is unfair, is actually generating a delusion. Or I don't deserve this. I'm generating a delusion. I'm using energy and internal resources that I need to meet whatever life is bringing to me. I'm burning through those resources to generate a delusion and to cogitate on a delusion. We seek to heal PTSD, not because there's anything inherently immoral. It's not that person's fault, but because that person deserves to have all of their internal resources for their own use, to meet the challenges of life, not to be sitting there burning through resources, first to generate something that's not true and isn't actually happening right now in the moment. So it takes an enormous amount of energy to generate the delusion inside, the flashback. But then people spend all of these energy on top of that, generating a coping mechanism, trying to deal with what I generated inside. It's miserable. I promise you, with my level of intelligence and the skills that I have and the opportunity, right, the culture and society I live in affords me opportunities. I could get student loan. I promise you that what I accomplished from 0 to 40 was almost nothing. I don't even want to get depressed talking about how little I accomplished, because 80 to 100% of all of my internal resources were constantly generating this massive delusion of fear and paranoia and whatever that flashback was, and then generating a bunch of coping mechanisms. So like, I have to cope with this, I have to suppress with this, I have to heal this, I have to get around it, I have to deal with this, I have to deal with this. You can't get anything fucking done. When I tell my clients, when they come in with PTSD and I sort of describe, are you experiencing this and that? And I empathize with them and I say, people don't understand, and they'll kind of hint that it's like, maybe you're being lazy or you don't try hard enough. And I tell them, that's not it. It's like all of your resources are being burnt through by this thing. And sometimes they get choked up, or sometimes they're like, yeah, like, how did you know? Or I've talked to therapists before, they didn't know. I know because I lived it. I'm not like, it's not, I didn't read it in a textbook. It destroys all of your resources. It doesn't even destroy them, it consumes them minute to minute. You generate that internal state, and then you have to generate a bunch of coping mechanisms. If you're even trying, personality disorders don't even try to cope with it. They will just take that madness inside and they will just project it all over everyone, and they'll make life miserable. They will force everyone to act as if they're living in the same paranoid reality. It's got nothing to do with fair or unfair. So even in the kinder example with a human who had an adaptive childhood, pardon me, sorry about that. They also we're all generating delusions and burning through our resources, generating through delusions. So let's come back to the spiritual reality. I believe that what spiritual folks call the veil of forgetfulness, you enter this life, and who you truly are and what consciousness is and what it means to be experiencing in total the entire universe, all the energy of the universe, to be made of stardust, literally made of stardust, to be made of particles that existed in the hearts of stars billions of years ago, whatever, like, to be this, to be energy, which quantum physics tells you is never destroyed, only transmuted into other states. It decays into this form or that form, or this state of energy, that state of energy, this frequency, that frequency, whatever, which then in this reality takes on these forms. This is science, not me. To truly know all of that means that there's no veil, right? So the veil, I don't know why when I do this, I finally figured out how to turn off the balloons and the thumbs up thing, but when I do this, the screen turns bluish. I don't know why. Anyway, the veil of forgetfulness in spirituality, supposedly that is dropped over us when we enter this life, so that we only know ourselves as an individual. I'm having my individual subjective experiences of reality, and spiritually I seek to unify with all life and all consciousness, but I have difficulty with that because there's this veil. If what humans do psychologically tracks with what that is, and if it tracks with what that shaman said to me, which is, there is no veil, it's an illusion. There is no veil. I think what that means is that we generate the veil moment to moment. The veil is all of those delusional beliefs that life was supposed to be fair, that there's something about me that shouldn't get hit by a bus tomorrow. There's something about me that shouldn't die from some terrible wasting disease that involves a lot of pain and stuff. Like, why? That parasite in the microscope died that death. As a conscious life, like, there's no rules. Like, nothing got set down here where it's like, no, but you're supposed to have 80 years. There's no supposed to. The thinking that there's a supposed to is the veil. The only way to unify with life and consciousness is to stop generating the veil. The veil is the delusion. The veil is an illusion generated by me, generated by you. It is composed of all of those beliefs that things are fair or unfair, that you deserve something or you don't deserve something, that you are your identity as a teacher or you are not your identity as a teacher, that you are a good person and you're not a bad person. I'm not saying that within whatever this is that we shouldn't work to have happier lives, better lives, contribute to others, because it brings joy, and joy puts me in touch with consciousness. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do those things, but what I'm saying is, as soon as we get attached to ideas of identity, of deserving, of not deserving, of morality, of rightness, of wrongness, etc., it makes us cruel towards other people. When I believe in rightness and wrongness, the very word parasite says, that's a bad thing. I don't give a shit if it burns to death on a microscope. You cannot be one with life. You cannot be one with all conscious life and love the expression of life and how energy presents in all forms, and then simultaneously say, this life is a bad kind of life, and I don't give a shit if it burns to death on a microscope. But I don't want to. I shouldn't. It's unfair if I do. Get bent. We're all nuts. We're all nuts. This is where spirituality tracks with psychology. The more you get into what's called mental illness, the deeper you get into personality disorders, the more you get into a rigid, emotional, psychological, somatic state of being that is generated from inside and has no relationship to what's happening outside or to what's true outside. It's a delusion. If you go all the way, you have people that we call psychotic because they're completely delusional. Nothing that they believe or how they act has any relationship to what's true outside of them. In one case, I had a professor who was talking about why you never argue with someone in psychosis. So there was a client, a schizophrenic client, who absolutely believed that she had no mouth. She had no mouth. She has no mouth. Nothing from here to here, nothing, empty. There's no neck, there's no mouth. And as an inexperienced therapist decided, oh, she's eating lunch. Just going to go over and say, hey, I was just curious. I know that you've sort of stated and you believe that you don't have a mouth. I'm just wondering where you're putting the food and what you're chewing the food with. Attempting to challenge the delusion. What do you think happened? Client stopped eating. The client was generating that delusion with such fierce attachment that you were not going to offer evidence and have them go, oh my God, I can't believe it. I'm healed. I do have a mouth. That wasn't what was going to happen. This is why when someone is truly in psychosis, you don't argue. The same is true of severe PTSD. When people come in with severe PTSD and they're like, my spouse did X, Y, or Z, or this person, blah, blah, you might suspect that this person is severely deep in fight or flight and may be misreading innocuous situations, but you don't, are you? All you're going to do is make them feel threatened and attacked, and it's going to put them even deeper. But there's a delusion being generated moment to moment by me, by that person. And it's not just PTSD. Everybody, the veil is the delusion. We're generating it. It's not placed. Right? The shaman I spoke with, I believe him. There is no veil. We generate it through our delusions of what's right and what's wrong and which life deserves to live and which life doesn't. And I can ignore the pain and suffering of chickens and cows because I'm hungry and I want to feed my kids. And it's not really happening. You know what? They just make it up. It's a bunch of whiny vegans and blah, blah. You know that's not fucking true. My dad was a biochemist who went into slaughterhouses and tested. Believe me, it is a horror. It's a horror. If you pretend anything different, you are deep in delusion. Me too. I'm deluded about a bunch of shit. I'm behind a veil that I'm actively generating. There is no veil of forgetfulness. We are actively generating it moment to moment through our own choice. As autonomous, free-willing beings, we're generating this world of delusional beliefs about fairness and not fairness and morality and rightness and wrongness and what should happen and what shouldn't happen and who's worth it and who's not worth it and who deserves this and who doesn't deserve this and blah, blah, blah. Those are the bricks that construct this wall. That's the yarn that creates this tapestry, this veil that weaves this veil of which we speak. We are generating it moment to moment. John, if you want to see what's beyond the veil, stop generating it. If I continue to generate it, then clearly some higher mind has decided this is what's good for you and this is what you're doing and there's something you need to learn. Be inside the veil and experience this. Okay, I accept. I mean that. I accept. This is where spirituality intersects with biology, psychology. These are not things we flash back to. These are not things that are imposed on us. It might not be our fault. It might have been imposed on us in childhood and we learned it. But my nervous system is actively generating those past, those experiences, those states. And unless I'm in perfect alignment with the beauty and the eternity, the expansiveness of what it is to be conscious and alive, which is to be at one with all of it from which I have come and to which I will return. If I'm not in that state, I am actively generating a delusion moment to moment, second to second. And when I feel weak and I feel tired, it's not because something's being done to me. It's because I'm using all of my resources to generate this veil, to create the illusion that I am separate, that I am different, that there's a set of rules and those rules apply to me and I can manipulate and control those rules so that I have a nicer life and that I deserve something better and people who are bad people deserve something that's not better and blah, blah, blah. And you look at the world, you know that's bullshit. There has never been any evidence whatsoever that good people get better outcomes and that bad people have worse outcomes. It's always, when you hear people do that, it's always infantile. It always sounds like an infant trying to invent some ideal reality that reassures them. Sometimes bad things happen to bad people, but sometimes good things happen to bad people. There's no pattern. The only pattern is if you accept that life is just going to randomly do shit and very little of it is specifically for you. But if you just accept that you're conscious and alive, and you get this chance to experience whatever this is and to be conscious and be alive in it, you can experience an inner state that feels unified, that feels energized, that feels attuned to joy, and just joy and pleasure at the fact that you exist right now. That's it. That's all we have. There is nothing else. That's what I have to say today. Love you guys. Talk to you next time.
Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.